You're listening to The Support Report with Be Present, where we share real stories from young adults and how support changed their lives.
Hey, thanks for tuning into another episode of The Support Report. I am Justin Peters and not unfortunately joined by Kiara Riga today. She's out, but I do have a really good friend with me. And I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to get a little tactical, a little practical, and maybe a little nostalgic in this conversation today. Joining me is Heidi Currey. Heidi is a writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. Her 21 years in the financial industry and her personal experience as a caregiver laid the groundwork for co-founding First 40, where she helps family members avoid the end-of-life scavenger hunt and preserve someone's legacy. Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited too. As soon as we first met, I was like, oh my gosh, you are a great fit for this community, for this audience. So I'm excited for this conversation. And to kick things off here, I'm guessing First 40, the closure map workbook, isn't just something that you were always meant or called to create. There had to be a backstory. There had to be some kind of experience that led you to this. What was that experience?
Yeah, honestly, as you mentioned, I spent 21 years in the financial industry. And so I worked with a lot of people who were facing issues like cancer and going through end of life planning. But it was somewhat academic, like always saying, oh, these are the financial strategies, or oh, make sure you check your beneficiaries. And so very by the book. But when it really hit home for me was when I started to serve as a caregiver for first my mother and then my father, as they both faced cancer. So my mom had lung cancer diagnosed in 2019. And from the point that she went into the hospital to the point she passed away was just 4 short months. And then however, 4 years later, I guess in 2023, my father was diagnosed with actually in 21, he was diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a form of blood cancer. But he went into the hospital with sepsis in January of 23, and that fast-tracked my caregiving experience for him, which was exponentially more difficult for 2 reasons. Number one, losing the second parent was extremely more stressful because there's nobody else in the house. But then also going through the experience with somebody who lives 90 miles away from me when you're the only caregiver, like that was a really, really tough thing. And I live near Sacramento, California. He lived in Reno, Nevada. So I had to figure out how to do all of this long distance over a mountain pass in the middle of winter, in one of the worst winters on record. So not my most fun experience. But as we all do, and I know as your listeners do, like as you're a caregiver, you figure it out. Like you dive in and you try to figure out how to best serve the person that you love. So I just went into full triage mode and completely went all in on trying to figure that out while balancing my life in Auburn and a full-time job as a leader with a financial company. And, no surprise at the end of the day, when he finally did pass away and I could reflect back on that experience, I just realized like I had 21 years in the financial industry. He was an attorney and we missed so many steps. And so as I processed this and really sat down with my best friend, now turned business partner, Nicolene, I just shared like, wow, I thought I had it all figured out. And I just wish I would have done X, Y, or Z differently. And she and I started to dream about the fact that maybe we could create a guide or a map to help other people who are going through similar experiences. So we started to capture like what were my learnings in that 4-year span between my mom and my father's experiences with cancer. And we came up with this idea of having a workbook of steps that could guide people through it. But as you mentioned, like the tactical stuff, a lot of the tactical resources that are out there feel so big and overwhelming. And even from the financial industry background, it just feels like we want to put so much information on people that they almost get analysis paralysis, like they can't move forward. And so we wanted to make it something that was bite-sized and easy to digest and could empower people to take steps forward. And so we just started to brainstorm what that could look like. And, as we kicked around how many steps to create, we said, there's got to be the perfect number here. And, in my faith tradition, Christianity, the number 40 shows up a ton. So usually in times of trials, tribulations, transformation. However, in addition to that, we have people in Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, who also have the number 40 that shows up a lot. and a pregnancy is 40 weeks and the Monopoly board has 40 squares. So we just decided like 40 steps feels right. So that's what gave us the idea to start forming First 40 and to create the Create Your Own Closure Map workbook.
Yeah, I got a glimpse into the workbook and I even like how approachable it is. Like you guys put a lot of fun and like playfulness in some of it. Lots of drawings and like little animations and stuff. So it felt really approachable whenever I first opened it. It didn't feel like a large homework assignment and a daunting
Right.
task. I almost wanted to start filling some of it out and like working through some of it. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that was a huge intentionality. We know that even as we start to dive into some of the different steps, some are a little bit more fun and some are a little more tactical. But when we're in the middle of caregiving, or even the person who's going through a cancer experience, like sometimes you just need to take a breath and take a break and pause. And so we wanted to give a lot of brain breaks throughout where people could just take that breath and kind of say, okay, I need to recharge, then I can go back into whatever I'm doing.
So let's dive into it. Let's first maybe tackle some of the tactical aspects
Yeah.
of it. What are a couple of the tactical tasks that you should consider doing that would be a whole lot harder after someone passes away?
Well, they're actually, I will say it's kind of a twofold. I will answer that, but I will say that some of the tactical steps are actually most critical before someone passes away. And so, what you'll find in here, and I'm sure any of your caregivers listening will resonate with this, but yeah, little things like having a list of all of your loved ones' medications for every single appointment that includes the dosages and the doctors and the pharmacies, because my dad was in the middle of three different hospital networks. So
Mhm.
his primary care physician was with one, his cardiologist was with another, his hematologist was with an independent organization. And so while we are in the middle of the information age, it was not a guarantee that their systems would update as medications and dosages were changed. And especially as his condition progressed toward the end, like we were changing dosages and eliminating certain medications and adding other ones in pretty regularly. And if we didn't have that printed copy as we went into doctor's appointments, it could be, damaging to him because they would have drug interactions and whatever. So that's one of the tactical steps, is to make sure you've got that, not only just whatever digital copy you have, but actually have a physical copy you can hand to doctors when you go into those appointments.
That's smart.
Um,
Kiara and I have talked a lot about like how can you show up well as a supporter, and like one of the
yeah,
things she references a lot is like, just come to my appointments and take notes for me because cancer brain,
totally.
I forget a whole lot. I need to remember exactly what was said, was decided on. And then I love this aspect too, like just like cataloging medications and some of the other symptoms and timeline, all of that. This is all really great pieces of information because I feel like as a health professional, you can never have too much information. And someone that comes in
Correct.
well organized will only enable that health professional to better serve the patient then.
I never had a health professional who was upset that I handed them a piece of paper. Like every single one was, oh, thank you so much, because it also puts their minds at ease that they're making sure that they have accurate information as well. And I love, love, love that call out on being the patient advocate. When my mom was going through her lung cancer experience, I was still, traveling a lot for work. And so I remember vividly a couple of times that they actually conference called me in. So I was in Minneapolis for a meeting and they lived in Reno, but they would actually ask the doctor's permission to put me on speakerphone. So then it had my mom and my dad. And then I was also just jotting notes wildly in the background. And it was amazing how many times, like the three of us each, like heard different pieces, but triangulating it, we got the whole picture. And so I love that call out to have a patient advocate there and taking notes.
That's smart. What else on the tactical side? What else is kind of
Yeah.
important to get right up front?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I would just call out, and obviously I know this audience is more for young people, whereas, I was thinking this more as caregiving for my parents, but even for young people, I think having some of their wishes documented ahead of time, as far as like, what would I, and I know it sounds depressing to say it as like, what do you want in your obituary?
Yeah.
But we call it, what's your life's highlight reel? So we
Mhm.
really want to hear from people. What are those notable achievements that you're super proud of, that you would want to have people aware of about what you left on this earth before you left it? And obviously that can get updated. So if we do have cancer and we, praise God, get into remission, and then, down the road we change it, great. But having that conversation of what are my life's highlight real notable achievements ahead of time, I think is super important. And then another one that our pastor actually recommended for us, and I'm super grateful, is thinking through the celebration of life. And so that, again, it may sound like it's a depressing topic, but oh my goodness, we talked about it before my dad even got cancer. Like we sat down with the pastor and just said, hey, like in the event, because you never know, like it could be a car crash or, whatever. So in the event that something would happen, what would you want your celebration of life to look like? I would have had no idea like what hymns he wanted or what scriptures he would want read or who he would want to eulogize at the service. So we got to have all those conversations ahead of time. So then when he did finally pass away, and it was so stressful and so chaotic because even though it was expected, like the end went so fast, and I'm sure other people experienced that too. I just wouldn't have wanted to think about some of those details. I would have just been so in grief and needing time to just get over the shock of having gone from full-time caregiving to suddenly grieving the loss of your person. To then have to think like, oh, what song do you pick? Like that's a whole nother level of detail that if you already have it ahead of time that you've talked about it and documented it, it's super helpful.
Yeah, and just the pressure that you'd want to do it right and like you'd want to do it
Mhm.
the way they'd want to do it. I feel like that alleviates all of that kind of pressure and the stress of planning something like this. Man, this is the moment I really wish Kiara was here because I'd be curious to know if she's had those conversations and kind of her approach to this. But knowing her, I mean, she's not scared of death at all. She's so inspiring in that way and comfortable in these conversations. And I'm wondering if these are things that are often talked about in the young adult cancer space or not. But I would imagine if not, this would be a great thing because somebody might have a celebration of life that looks totally different than
Totally.
what their parent or caregiver would have planned for them. And maybe it's just a big party that they want to throw and they want to put on the Taylor Swift playlist or something that they made on
Totally.
Spotify. Like, good for them. Like,
Yeah.
I would want to do it right by the person. So I think that would alleviate a lot of the pressure.
Well, and the biggest compliment that we got, honestly, and I just again give the credit to my pastor who thought about it ahead of time and he inspired the step, which is in the workbook. But at the end of Dad's celebration of life, one of the people in the church came up to the pastor and said, you know what? I feel like I just spent an hour with Larry. And
Mm,
it's like, oh, what a huge compliment. Like it was exactly representative of my dad. And I don't know that it would have been that had I had to come up with it all on my own.
that's cool. Well, I want to shift to some of the tasks that are a little bit nostalgic. I think you kind of framed it as like the telling your story
Yeah.
section, but there were like a lot of prompts that I saw in the table of content that seemed like they would create a lot of opportunity for conversation and preserve
Yeah.
a lot of important memories. What are some of the nostalgic tasks that people are now grateful they had a conversation about or that they did or, partaked in?
Yeah, definitely. I think as we've started to share this message with people, it's probably the one that most resonates with most people because when we think about end of life planning, so often we geared strictly toward those tactical things like making sure your financial house is in order and all of that, but not really thinking through the legacy items. So at one of our workshops, we had a session and we were just asking people like, what are your treasured trinkets that you have around your house? Like, what are those things that you love that you have on the shelves? And so one of the ladies mentioned that she had this, beautiful collection of Hummels that had been passed down from multiple generations in her family. And so she treasures them. And so when we asked the question, like, well, have you documented the story of where these came from? It was almost like a deer in the headlights. And she's just like, well, no. And I think we sometimes assume people just know, like, oh, this is my special thing. Of course, people are going to know. I had another lady in a workshop that had, which is even bigger. It's crazy to me that this wouldn't have had a story behind it, but she has a huge, almost like a dishes hutch kind of a thing that actually was made from wood on her parents' farm in Indiana, and it had been passed down 3 generations.
That's
And
cool.
so her family has sort of teased her over the years on why she wants to keep this old antique thing and sort of pressuring her, like, you should just get rid of it, get something more modern. And so when we were in the session and I was saying, well, does your family know the story about where it came from? And she says, well, no, I've never told them that. And I'm like, well, that might change how they feel about it. Like, I get it's still antique, but if they know it actually was taken from wood on the farm that your great grandparents, homesteaded, that might be a different level of attachment to that item than if they didn't know. So those are some of the things, but it doesn't even have to be that big. Like when I was going through my dad's safety deposit box, I found this beautiful pearl necklace in there, but I have no idea whose it was or where it came from. And so even as I think about young people, like there are probably trinkets, like maybe there's some fun ring that, someone got from, a first boyfriend, or that somebody got on a special trip that they took, that they probably know that story, but I'm not sure that they would think to communicate it to parents or loved ones or someone else. So helping people to think through sharing their stories about their special things is one of the nostalgia steps.
It immediately made me think of my grandma whenever I read that one, because she has so many trinkets all throughout her house, and it's so fun going over there, and she'll just kind of wander around her house and pick things out or point things out and tell us the story about how she acquired it, where it came from, what's the meaning, did she make it, did someone else make it for her, who they come from. And I was like, man, I really need to be starting to document some of these stories and these things. I mean, I think we might remember some, but no way we'll remember all. And I would love to know which ones are really important to her and who she would ultimately want those to be given to. Because I don't know, I feel like you don't want to liquidate a house and then regret a couple of years later
Totally.
looking for things, or not necessarily realizing that the hutch did have a backstory and it was really important. It wasn't just an old antique piece of furniture that she never updated, but she was keeping it for a reason.
Exactly.
It
Yep.
And the other one that I really loved too was family recipes. And
Yes.
once again, I was kind of thinking of my grandma here, and I was like, she has so many recipes that I would be so sad if it wasn't documented how that was
Yeah.
made and passed along to probably not me, but my sister, who's an amazing cook. But I was like, we need to start documenting some of these things. Although my grandma seems to do the recipe a little bit different every single time, but give me the ingredients at least.
Exactly. No, it's so true. Actually, it's funny. We put that step in here because we definitely have heard from many people like, oh, I wish I could have my, grandma's famous lemon meringue pie recipe, or, and it's gone and I don't know where it is. But even my business partner, Mickley, and I were, we've been working on this workbook for over a year now. And so this is something that we've been talking about. And she had me over at her house on New Year's, and they made their family's famous black-eyed pea soup on New Year's. And so first time I'd ever had it. And I was like, oh my goodness. I didn't even know about that tradition. I guess that's a thing, but yeah, black-eyed peas on New Year's. But it was such a good soup. And so I said, oh my goodness, can you send me the recipe? And she literally sent me an email and she was laughing. She's like, ha ha, nobody had this recipe. You made me document it. Thank you for forcing me to give it to my kids too. So it's like, oh, yes, we need to do this. Write them down.
That's cool. And one more on the list that I was kind of curious about. What is burn after reading? I was like, man, that one was probably the most intriguing of the 40 task.
We really debated whether to put it in, but the funny story on why is that as I was going through my parents' house, I inadvertently tripped across a keepsake box full of treasures from my father's bachelor party. And I'm not sure he necessarily wanted me to see that box. So it was quite the interesting experience, but it got us to think about, like, all of us have things. Maybe it's private journals, maybe it's, something that you just don't necessarily want your parent or your spouse or your kids to necessarily find. Like maybe you're keeping, your first journal from your first relationship 25 years ago. Like, so those things, like, what is it that should happen with them? So number one, if you're able and you really don't need that stuff anymore, clean it out, just get rid of it. But if for some reason it's important to you and you want to treasure it, but you don't necessarily want a parent, a loved one, a child finding it when they're going through the house, then we recommend having a proxy. So somebody who can say, like, oh, you know what? those journals were really good for me when I was super angry or going through whatever, but why don't we just get somebody to take those and just take them to the shred bin before anybody else has to read it? So,
That's cool. I love it. And then the surprising emphasis that I saw in the workbook was around self-care and
mhm.
kind of the importance of self-care as a supporter. Do you mind expanding on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and it's funny, I've listened to a few episodes of your podcast and I hear this come up so often, and it doesn't matter what stage we're in. I think we're all just so bad at realizing the importance of self-care when we're in the middle of caregiving. But because I was in that position where I was long distance, like dad literally went into the hospital on, January 16th. He ended up passing away by April 15th. So not a long stretch there, but just in that 4 months, like trying to figure out how to balance everything and care for him. He was living by himself at the time. And I think that there's something innately in those of us that have that kind of type A personality where it's like, okay, I just got to do this and you figure it out and you got to start to try to do it all yourself. And I just so wish, like in hindsight, that I would have thought this through the minute he got the cancer diagnosis. Like we knew this was coming. Like it might have been a month from then, it might have been 5 years from then, but we knew eventually we were going to face it. And to have been able to think through, like, how can I build the right experience where I can give the care I want to give him, but also have the ability to unplug and recharge so that I can still be healthy instead of trying to do it all. And, I often say to people, I subjected him to my subpar caregiving skills. Like, I am not a nurse. And God bless nurses, like, oh my goodness, they're so amazing and they are so gifted. And this is how they're wired. I have a finance brain. I do not have the caregiving gene. So while I was doing the best I could, I just got so many things wrong. Like even how I lifted him, I ended up getting tendonitis because I did it wrong and I never
Yeah.
asked somebody to teach me how to do it right. Yeah, so all of these little things made me realize that taking a minute to highlight the importance of self-care was critical. And so we have several steps throughout where we can really get people to start to think through, like, how do you care for yourself? How do you take those little moments of time to recharge? But then also some, if you have the resources and ability, hiring caregivers to come in and supplement your care. There are gifted people who want to do caregiving for a living that can give you respite. So even if they just come and sit with your loved one for a couple of hours while you go and have dinner or take a bubble bath or do whatever, you actually come back stronger if you have that time to recharge, kind of like the oxygen mask on the plane analogy. So yeah, it was super, super important for me to get that message out because I don't think I did it well. In fact, I know I didn't do it well. And areas of my life suffered, like my marriage, my work, even the caregiving for my dad, it all went down a few notches because I was spread so thin. And I think if I would have thought through some of this ahead of time, I could have built a support network around me to be able to give him better care and also still have my own like care and life too, which we need to do that in order to be able to be present for the ones that are facing cancer.
Ah, man, you're right. I have heard it time after time on the podcast. I know Abby talks about it frequently as well, like kind of building your team of Avengers around you that to help support you, support your loved one is super important because burnout's a real thing and it's really hard to take care of somebody else and you want to do everything for them, but that's just not always possible while trying to maintain work and family back home and your health and all of those things. So asking for help and not trying to be Superman or Superwoman in the sense of caregiving is, I think, really important. So I'm glad you guys included that in as part of the workbook.
And I will say too, like, I did start, and I think one of the steps that I had shared with you early on was one that we call food with friends, which is really, I noticed that my dad would eat more food if he was doing it in a social situation because he's an extrovert. So really being mindful of personality styles. I'm more of an introvert, so I'd be happy sitting by myself all day, but he really would want that social interaction. So I built in a calendar where I rotated through his friends a few days a week for lunch, where they would bring lunch over, or we had meals in the fridge that they could heat up. But then he would eat more and they would have that social time. So I thought about that in terms of the like support, but I really do wish I would have looked at professional caregiver support earlier, and especially like um, whether it's an agency or independent caregivers, like just even a few hours a week, and to ask some of them to teach me how to do some of the stuff I was doing. Like I just know that I was on such a steep learning curve that I did not give him the best in the beginning as I was learning. So
Mm. Well, Heidi, as we're wrapping up the conversation, I would love to know kind of where people can digest more of this. Of course, you have the workbook out there. So, and the workbook, I think the formal name is Create Your Own Closure Map. Subtitle is Avoid the End of Life Scavenger Hunt. The workbook's great. Like I
yeah.
said, really fun. Actually, something that I would want to fill out. And you do a great job breaking down all the steps and giving prompts and that. But then it's part of this kind of bigger brand, First 40. I think people can go to first40.net to kind of learn about the entire brand, but also go and purchase the workbook. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And really, our mission and our call here is to try to help so many people to have more closure and less scavenger hunt, which is why we want the create your own closure map. So we do have them available for individual purchase for anybody who would be interested, but we also offer some good partner discounts for professionals. So whether it's medical professionals or financial professionals, like anybody out there who is working with anyone who might have a cancer diagnosis, we want to equip them. And so we offer some good discounts for bulk purchases for those. And then if somebody really feels like they need support, or they're alone in this, or they don't know where to start, or maybe their loved one just got a diagnosis and they don't know even how to get started in all of this, the workbook alone is great. But if you want somebody to go alongside you, we do offer some group experiences where we have some workshops. We can do coaching. So we help people with that as well. But yes, it's first40.net. So that'd be great.
Awesome. Heidi, final question for you. Through your experience, what does great support look like?
Oh, that's an intense question. First and foremost, I would say great support starts with authenticity and being present, which I know is very appropriate for your group. But time, like whatever you can do to outsource some of the tactical so that you have time to just be and engage and communicate, hear the stories, laugh, like just create memories, because it's just so, so precious if you can do that. So that to me is what great support looks like.
Well said, Heidi. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the support report. And I'm really excited to stay connected and see you guys continue to grow First 40.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Justin.